Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning. Welcome everybody to this specific hearing as part of the examination into the soundness of the remitted part of the Leeds site allocation plan. Most of you know me, but for those that don't, my name is Louise Gibbons and I'm the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to examine the plan. Just a reminder, please, to turn your phones and other notifications to silent if you haven't already done so. Just to introduce Helen, although she probably needs no introduction, Helen is your main point of contact. She's the programme officer. If you do need to speak to her today, just email her, please. And if you have any queries that aren't related to today's event, then again, please contact Helen separately. Just to note that this hearing is dealing with the integrated rail plan and its impact on the proposed site EG237 only, and that no other matters will be discussed, either relating to the proposed site or those relating to other subjects for the SAP Remittal. Just to note, you might see me look at another screen, particularly if documentation is referred to, and I may also look down to take notes, and I'm looking down, obviously reading at the moment, but I am paying attention to the discussion. I have a list of attendees who are participating this morning, and I will go through your names now. You've all got your cameras on. When I ask you, could you please confirm your name and your organisation if relevant, and then turn off your camera and mute your microphone again. The exception to that, as before, is council participants who will be the main representatives during the discussion. If you could keep your cameras on but microphones muted for me, please. So I'll start with council first, and who, Mr. Elliott, are you going to do introductions?
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning. So my name is Martin Elliott. I'm the head of strategic planning from Leeds City Council. And if I could introduce my executive member, Councillor Helen Hayden.
Good morning and lovely to meet you. My name's Helen Hayden. I'm councillor in Temple Newton on Leeds City Council and executive member for infrastructure and climate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And if I keep going and introduce Nicole Walker.
Morning, ma'am. Nicole Walker, legal advisor to the council.
Thank you.
And Paul Bingham.
Good morning. I'm Paul Bingham, team leader in strategic planning at Leeds City Council.
Thank you.
And Angela Lawson.
Good morning, ma'am. I'm Angela Lawson, Head of Station Development in Asset Management and Regeneration in Leeds City Council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And also Vash Bodiat.
I'm Vash Bodiat, Support Officer.
Thank you. Thank you. And no Miss Harry this morning. She was on my list, but...
That's correct, ma'am. Yeah, Miss Harry's unfortunately not able to make it this morning.
Okay, thank you. And then could the other participants introduce themselves? I'll start with the Scarborough group first, please.
Morning, ma'am. My name's Mike Ralph. I'm a partner of Xerum, who are Scarborough Group's planning consultants. I'm here with my colleague, Pete Cleave, and also Mark Jackson from Scarborough.
Okay, thank you. And finally, another familiar face, Mr. Hall, you can hear me, take it.
Yes, good morning, ma'am. Pleased to be here. My name is George Hall. I'm a Leeds resident.
Okay, thank you. Could everybody else except the main Leeds participant just turn your cameras off? Well, yes, please. It'll just help a little bit for me to focus. Thank you. I will go through a couple of formalities. There are some people that aren't familiar with the process, but most of you are, but I will just cover those for people who are listening to the live stream. As you're aware, I will lead this hearing and ask specific questions of participants, and there will be structured discussion based on the agenda, and responses should be directed to me. If we do have a break, I'm not sure that will be necessary, but if we do, please stay logged on to the meeting, but cameras and microphones should be turned off, as others will be able to see and hear you. Microphones should only be turned on if you are speaking. I will leave each time we have a break. We won't be using the chat function, but please use the raise hand facility if you're aware of that in Zoom to indicate you wish to say something, or turn your camera back on and raise your hand if you can't find them. Sometimes it's a bit of hard work trying to find all the symbols. They move around the screen depending on how many people I can see on the screen. I will give you all an opportunity to speak. As before, please keep your responses brief and focused. And I will ask the council for comments on points raised and will ask questions of them directly. And I will end the discussion when I have enough information. So the event is being live streamed to allow people to view as if attending a face-to-face event, although I understand this will be deleted at the end of the day. Is that correct? Yeah, thank you. Please don't show anything on the screen. New documentation should only be submitted following specific agreement from me. And this should be done through email contact with Helen. Just as a reminder of the purpose of the examination that's set out in my guidance note, which was issued on the 25th of May, 2021. And the examination is focused solely on the remitted part of the SAP, and to be sound, it should be positively prepared, effective, justified and consistent with national policy. And I need to consider whether it is sound, if not, why not, and what can be done to make it sound. Before I go any further, I just want to thank Helen and Vash in particular and the team at Leeds once again for making this virtual event possible. Can I just check, does everybody have a copy of today's agenda? If not, can you let Helen know? And it's also available on the website, I understand. Are there any questions on the general format of the hearing? In that case, then I understand the council would like to do an introduction. Is that still correct, Mr. Elliott?
Yes, ma'am. Councillor Hayden would like to say a few words at the beginning. Okay,
thank you. Councillor Hayden, when you're ready.
Thank you, ma'am, and good morning. And thank you for allowing this brief introduction to these further hearing sessions on the SAP remittal. I want to reinforce that the council is committed to getting a plan in place to guide good growth in the city. Whilst this has not been an easy task, we have always responded positively to the evidence and engaged with and listened to the views of local people. Therefore, it is appropriate that we are here today to discuss the integrated rail plan, which was published after the hearings, and address the views of Mr. Hall, who has been actively engaged in planning in Leeds for many years. We take the protection of the Greenbelt very seriously in Leeds, which is why we took the decision through the SAP remittal to delete the releases for housing. However, we can't do that for employment land, as the evidence shows we need more of it. Getting the levels right of employment land now is important to the city to meet the aspirations of an inclusive growth strategy and provide jobs, especially in this economic climate. I want to take this opportunity to thank Vash and Helen for today's remittal hearing, but also Martin and all the team for their ongoing work and many years of work on the SAP and being able to get good growth in Leeds. And I look forward to the hearing today and hearing everybody's views and to receive your final report in the due course. So thank you very much, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. In that case, then, is everybody happy that we now turn to the agenda? I'll come on to Mr. Hall. I'd like you to explain your concerns in a moment when we come on to the item related to the integrated rail plan. But first, I'd just like to check with the council whether there is any, whether there have been any updates in terms of employment land supply evidence, because I understand that it is looked at on a regular basis, and that obviously it was a little while since the hearing. So, Mr. Elliott.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that. Yes, as you say, it's been some time since the hearing session, and Mr. Bingham, who's responsible for the collation of that evidence, would like to just set out what the latest position is for you.
Yes, thank you, Ma'am. So we are in a position to bring the supply position up to the latest monitoring quarter, which would be the end of December 2021, if requested. The submitted employment land supply data set out in the SAP Remittal background paper appendix had a base date of September 2020. The revised data would provide a factual update and account for any changes in the intervening 15-month period, and it would reflect any additional windfall employment sites that would be permissions on non-allocated sites, the sites that aren't allocated for employment in the local plan, and it would reflect any losses of employment land to other uses and any expired planning permissions on non-allocated sites that have occurred in between the two dates. So referring to table 8 of page 52 of the background paper, at September 2020, the council reported an employment land supply of 489.6 hectares, of which 50.2 hectares fell within the HS2 safeguarded area. The council's position at that time was that the safeguarded area is not available and should be deducted from the overall land supply total, as was set out in the background paper. So the net position, excluding the safeguarded land, was reported to be 439.4 hectares, and that represented a deficit of 53.6 hectares against the general employment land requirement for the plan period of 2012 to 28 that was set out, which is set out in core strategy spatial policy 9. So if that information is updated to the base date of December 2021, the total land supply for the plan period before taking account of HS2 safeguarding is 498 hectares. For 46.9 hectares of that land is located within the HS2 safeguarded area, as reflected in the latest October 2021 directions. So accounting for the HS2 safeguarded land, the employment land supply is calculated to be 451.1 hectares, and that represents a deficit of 41.9 hectares against the 493 requirements. I can repeat any of those figures as necessary. So whilst the deficit has narrowed by just over 11 hectares, the scale of the shortfall remains significant. And as a result of this factual update of the employment land position, that would not alter the council's position over the need to allocate site EG 237 for general employment uses to help address the shortfall. And the addition of site EG 237, which is 21.2 hectares, would reduce the shortfall to 20.8 hectares overall. And I can just confirm there would be no updates to employment needs or requirement figures. So this would only just relate to bringing the supply position up to date.
Okay, thank you. And that was a position earlier on in the hearings, wasn't it? That the requirement hadn't been changed at all from what it was in the plan. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. So just to clarify now, then the shortfall is 20.8 hectares. Is that correct?
That's correct. If we account for site EG 237.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hall, did you want to say anything in response to the factual update on employment land supply?
No, excuse me. No, ma'am. I think that various other matters which I would like to comment on come through in the agenda, and I would like to have the opportunity to have a word on those specific points. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. In that case, any further points on land supply? I think it would be helpful to me if those were set out in a very short note, and again, just a factual update on the figures. Additional commentary, I think, on that is not necessary, because obviously I've had that through already through on your responses to my letter in March. So just the factual update would be helpful if you could send that through to Helen. I take it that wouldn't take long to produce. Would that be able to be sent to Helen by the end of this week?
Yes, it would. Yes, that would be fine.
Thank you. Anybody else want to make any comments on the supply situation?
Ma'am, if I may, just to clarify, the reference that Mr. Bingham gave to the background paper is reference CD Rem 1/3, and that's part of the core document list.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Then in that case, then we'll move on to the integrated rail plan itself. I have set out a couple of bullet points on that, and I do have some questions within that, but I think first it would be helpful, Mr. Hall, if you're able to just explain your position, and then I'll ask the council to talk through their response, and I might come in with questions on that then. Mr. Hall.
Thank you, ma'am. I consider that the changes which governments have made in the cancellation of the eastern leg of Leeds has a significant impact on the potential availability of land in the Leeds area. And even if there was exceptional circumstances without that, which my previous evidence has said I disagree with, I think that the questions arising from the cancellation of the eastern leg, as has been pointed out, does potentially, and I do say potentially, provide land which is safeguarded and therefore not green belt, clearly can come forward and could be developed, although there has been no explanation from the council in their reply as to where those areas of land are and what uses they could fulfill. I have read with great care the recent November statement from government, and also the October statement on safeguarding, which again I'd like to make a comment later on about. But in essence, I think that the cancellation of the eastern leg, given that the government have made proposals as options which would potentially replace the need for HS2, is something worthy of consideration by yourself and by this inquiry. Clearly, this is the detail of the integrated rail plan is not a matter which could be discussed fully at this inquiry, and neither would it be appropriate to do so. But I think that the key messages which come from here, and certainly evidences the fact that there is potential brownfield sites must be considered by yourself and by the council. Thank you.
Thank you. When you say potential brownfield sites, is it your understanding that those are possibly some of the safeguarded sites?
It is, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. And from the council's perspective, I mean, there are kind of a lot of nuances, and obviously we won't be able to get, as we say, into a detailed discussion about the plan, because I think from this discussion, it's probably going to be that there are still a lot of unknowns. But it would be helpful. Would the council like to do a kind of brief introduction to if you feel it's appropriate, on your position on the integrated rail plan, and then we can discuss a little bit more detail, particularly in terms of the timetables and potential options that there might be. And I say potential, obviously, because I think that's the position at the moment, but it would be helpful to understand that.
Thank you, ma'am. I think that would be really helpful. And the council's overall position is that the publication of the integrated rail plan doesn't change the justification for the proposal submitted to you via the SAP remittal. And it doesn't change that because of the impact that the integrated rail plan continues to have on those safeguarded directions. So I think it would be helpful if the head of City Station and head of service responsible for HS2, Angela, gives an overview of the implications of the rail plan and also the timetable which accompanies it.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that would be helpful. Ms. Lawson.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, as I think Mr. Hall alluded to, the integrated rail plan was published on the 18th of November 2021, and it paused the eastern leg of HS2 subject to the undertaking of a study into the Leeds, into how to bring HS2 trains to Leeds from the East Midlands and also Leeds station capacity. However, we still don't have terms of reference published by government on the study, and until terms of reference are published, the study work won't commence. And the IRP identified that the safeguarding would remain in place until the study had been completed and the option was understood.
So, so just to clarify, then, I think what I'm trying to understand through this is that you said there's a pause on the eastern leg of the HS2. Is that correct? Because it was my understanding that the eastern leg of the HS2 isn't going to come, but that alternatives were being looked at to get HS2 trains through to Leeds. I'm not sure. There's probably a nuance there that isn't entirely clear. It would be helpful for me to understand whether, I suppose, whether they will still, whether there is the potential for a train line to be built, or whether they'll just use existing tracks. So I take it you're with the study not being published, or the terms of reference not even being produced, then you don't have that any idea either, is that?
No, it's undecided. The Secretary of State for Transport responded to the Transport Select Committee on the 27th of April and was asked specifically about the safeguarded land and also the T-shaped station, which is the result of the safeguarded land. And his response was he didn't want to preempt the study into how to bring high-speed trains to Leeds and Leeds station capacity, but he recognised that a solution needed to be found.
Thank you. And in your response to that first question that I asked in terms of the time frame, what's the difference? Because I think you referred to a strategic outline business case. So what's the difference between that and the study? Is that the same thing?
We believe, from what it says in the integrated rail plan, that the outcome of the study will then require a strategic outline business case to justify the option. That's our assumption, as opposed to confirmation from government.
Okay, and I take it then the strategic outline business case is then subject to a business case process. Do you have any idea of how long those sorts of things take in terms of schemes that relate to rail?
I can give you the indication of how long the business cases are taking for Leeds existing station programme, which is currently being developed by Network Rail. They started the strategic outline business case in 2019, the outline business case has just been submitted, and we think it will be another 2 to 3 years before a full business case will be submitted and then have to go through the approval process. So it's approximately 5 years to get from strategic outline business case development through to a final decision on funding and implementation.
And you referred to the safeguarding direction staying in place until such time as it's known. Does the IRP confirm that? I just wondered if you could take me to that particular paragraph. The safeguarding direction is referred to in paragraph 3.49 of the IRP, isn't it?
Yes, I don't know whether this helps as well, but HS2 Limited on behalf of DFT also wrote to all owners and occupiers a kilometre from the centre of the safeguarding route line straight after the IRP to confirm that the safeguarding would remain in place and their compensation schemes surrounding that would also remain in place.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I mean, that answers some of my questions under the alternative high-speed rail option. Is it possible that the former route could still be identified as a preferred route, or is there a possibility of other routes?
The Secretary of State at the Transport Select Committee was asked specifically the question of whether or not the T-shaped station would be required, and he confirmed that he didn't want to preempt that from the options appraisal, which seemed to indicate that the options would include options on the safeguarded land, but that's the only information we have.
Okay, thank you. I think it would be helpful for evidence purposes to if they're available, a copy of the letter from HS2 Limited. Obviously, I don't need to see the names of the people it was sent to, but if there's a template letter or a redacted version of that, that would be helpful. And also, you referred to the Select Committee. Are the minutes available publicly now? That it would be helpful to have those as well.
I believe there's a public transcription. Yeah.
Okay. If those could be provided, obviously that might take a little bit longer. Mr. Elliott, do you want to give some thought to how long that might take to provide?
I think, ma'am, the letter we can certainly get to you by the end of the week. The transcription, I think similarly, I think we should be able to get that to you by the end of the week, but we'll let you know tomorrow if that's going to prove to be a problem.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Mr. Hall, did you want to raise any points? And we have covered safeguarding directions to some extent, but were there any points you wanted to add?
Yes, please, ma'am. My understanding is that a large section of the study really is regarding either the potential upgrading or the capacity of Leeds City Station as opposed to anything else, because clearly we can see from the information which is put out by HS2 or by the government that Northern Powerhouse Rail and the upgrading of sites to both in speed and capacity are viable options which the government consider is preferable rather in expense terms to the completion of HS2 as originally suggested. In terms of safeguarding, I have to say that having read the comments of the council and timeframes of suggesting 18 months and 2 years, this mystifies me, quite truthfully, because we can see that in terms of safeguarding, they are they are saying, and the proof of the pudding is in the eating, that they put out a safeguarding paper in August and then kind of came up and cancelled the August one in October. So they are, as they say in their statements, they are reviewing this on a regular basis. So I can honestly foresee myself that when we are talking in terms of 18 months to 2 years, I'm not quite sure how the council's come up with this figure. Probably they know something that I don't. I don't think that speaking other than that, as to the evidence you've heard this morning, at the moment there is a necessity for me to justify whether HS2 should be cancelled and whether in fact Northern Powerhouse Rail is more preferable. That is a matter for others, and certainly people who have more authority to deal with this than myself. But clearly the options which have been put forward prove that there are options. Potentially the suggesting of upgrades and use of existing lanes, existing tracks, does suggest to me anyway that their land will become available, and given what is said again in the safeguarding direction, namely that there is no reason whatsoever why anyone should not put in an application for safeguarded land, providing they, through the council, approach the safeguarding officer of HS2 to see whether in fact any application which may come forward would be appropriate. I don't think I can add to anything other than that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple of points there that I'd just like to clarify with the council. So Mr. Hawley's final point was mentioning about that potentially someone could put in an application on safeguarded land. Is that the case? Is that a possibility that a planning application could come forward on something that's got a safeguarding direction on it?
Yes, that's correct. So the safeguarding directions in place to ensure there's no, it's protected from conflicting development before construction starts, I suppose the issue would be any major employment development would be seen as conflicting with the purpose of safeguarding the land. So the process doesn't stop an application being submitted, but there'd be a requirement to consult HS2 on that application, and then they'd assess it in terms of its conflict. I mean, our view's been, and it's demonstrated by the fact that any safeguarded land hasn't come forward since it's been safeguarded, is that any major employment development would be a conflict with that safeguarding direction.
And you say nothing's come forward on safeguarded land, not even for small. I take it the safeguarded land is sufficient land to ensure that construction could take place, or that it could accommodate the new line. Is that correct? That's correct. So I suppose small developments, there's potential that they would be assessed as not conflicting, and there's potential to come forward. But I think the evidence shows that where the land has been safeguarded, it hasn't come forward within the last year. The safeguard land's been safeguarded at different times, but the first safeguarding directions were 2016, and that land hasn't come forward or been delivered for employment. Other directions added land in 2017 and 2019, and the position's the same. Whilst it's been safeguarded, any major employment development hasn't come forward. Okay, thank you. I'll come back to you, Mr. Hall, in a moment. But just on the matter of safeguarding land again, the integrated rail plan refers to that they stay in place to affect so that affected residential property owners can retain access to the various support schemes. Are the support schemes only available to people who live on safeguarded land potentially, or does that scheme also cover other land uses as well? Is anybody aware of that?
I think the phrase from DFT and HS2 Limited is that, and it is available on their website in terms of their compensation schemes, because there are a number of them. So for residential properties, yes, absolutely. In terms of businesses, they ask that businesses make contact with them if they have a change in circumstances, and then discuss their position. And they would be taken on an individual basis.
So that's if the safeguarding is affecting, I don't know, the business or land values. Is that correct?
I think it's just if their circumstances change. That's how they phrase it. I mean, the best people to ask on this would probably be DFT or HS2.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Elliott, I see you've got your hand raised.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Just on the Mr. Hall's point around planning applications, we do also have to take seriously that this is a development plan which has to meet tests of soundness, and those tests of soundness do relate to land being available and deliverable within the plan period. So whilst we can't preempt the conclusion of the integrated development plan or any study that comes as a result of that, what we can do is make our assessments in terms of land availability and its deliverability on the basis of continued uncertainty around safeguarded land, and come to our best understanding from both the IRP and latest announcements from DFT and HS2 on the length of time that is likely to occur. And our view is that is significantly going to affect the availability and deliverability of sites within the plan period. Okay,
thank you. Mr. Hall referred to safeguarding, I think safeguarding update. So there was an August, was that August 2021?
Yes.
And then that was cancelled in October. Can you just clarify what those are, or if the council know what those are?
All I can say, ma'am, is literally what I read in the October statement, which says that the October statement replaces and cancels the August safeguarding directive. If I may, just to come back on something which I was shaking my head on, and I think you noticed. This was regarding a statement which Mr. Bingham had said that no land had come forward, and then he starts talking about 17 and 19. Well, clearly this new statement of cancellation is very, very recent, very, very material, and we are talking of have people come forward between, let's say, November and now where we are in May. Do they understand the implications of that? I'm sure that there are a good number of people, not least developers, which are aware that when safeguarding is put in, that generally it is that land will not be developable during the plan period. I understand that, but this is something which possibly Mr. Elliott would like to make a comment on. Thank you.
Did you want to respond to that, Mr. Elliott or Mr. Bingham? No.
Yes, I can respond on that. I mean, I recognise it is a change of circumstances that are different, but just the mechanism of developers being able to put in planning applications on safeguarded land has existed since the safeguarded plan's been in place. And I suppose I was just giving an update in terms of where land has been safeguarded. It hasn't come forward for development, even though those mechanisms have been in place where a planning application could have been submitted. I'm not aware of planning application being submitted on the safeguarded land since November 2021. Recognise that that's only a few months, and that there is the potential that could happen. But given the land safeguarded, HS2 would obviously take a view as to whether that development would conflict with or prejudice the outcome of the IRP study.
Thank you. And if safeguarding directions were to be lifted, I'll come to you in a moment, Ms. Lawson. How long does the direction take to lift? Is there a process that it needs to go through to do that? Anybody able to answer that from the council?
I think that would just be the issuing a new safeguarding direction. So other than the directions being related to the ILP study, I think other than that, I wouldn't expect there to be a process in place to lift the safeguarding directions. That'd be a matter for the government and HS2 to make the decision as to whether there was a need to safeguard the land.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Ms. Lawson, you had your hand up.
Thank you. Yes, it was just to make the point that the safeguarding directions are made by the Department for Transport, but implemented by HS2, but they are actually covering land for NPR as well as for HS2 and for rail schemes in terms of the definition of the requirement for the safeguarding.
Sorry, can you go through those other, what else do they cover?
Sorry, I think it's phrased as rail schemes and Northern Powerhouse Rail as well as HS2.
Okay, so these are other references in the integrated rail plan.
No, sorry, in the safeguarding directive. So some of the more recent safeguarding updates with additional land requirements have been specifically required for NPR, but the direction is the same.
Okay, thank you. I think that was a question I asked actually, whether there were other potential implications of the integrated rail plan. So I'd asked specifically about the East Midlands high speed line, but are there implications for the Northern Powerhouse Rail then? Is that requiring additional land to be safeguarded?
The difficulty is that at this stage we don't know. In terms of Northern Powerhouse Rail, the reason we don't know is because there is reference to a second phase of NPR as part of the integrated rail plan. So there's the first commitment to the Transpennine route upgrade, which is effectively phase 1 of Northern Powerhouse Rail, and the Northern Powerhouse Rail second phase needs to be designed and developed.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Hall, you referred earlier on to there potentially being other options, such as using existing tracks. Are you aware of? I take it you're not aware of any more detail other than what you've seen through the rail plan.
That's correct, ma'am. That's correct. It's published detail. The thing is that kind of clearly, in my view, that the suggestions which have been made by government were there to come forward in Northern Powerhouse Rail are most certainly likely to come forward at a time far shorter than it would with the implementation of HS2 as originally determined. I mean, we're therefore talking of potentially 2 to at least 2 decades ahead, and that of course is way outside the plan period and what we are talking about, what we're talking about now. I honestly do feel that in terms of taking the existing site out of Greenbelt, this is another matter which you want to discuss. I feel that the situation here is that if employment land applies to this site, it applies to every other Greenbelt site, unless the council can tell me different in Leeds. And I have always felt that this is opening Pandora's box.
Okay, so that was the general point you've got about Greenbelt release.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll come on to discussing whether exceptional circumstances exist to justify the permanent release of Greenbelt land shortly. Were there any other points anybody wanted to make in relation to the timetable, potential options, and has there, I mean, I think in your response to my question 1 on the rail plan, you said you'd had no correspondence with the Department for Transport on this matter. Is that stayed the case?
Yes, that is still the case.
Okay, so the only thing that you've seen in terms of formal discussion or formal commentary from the government is in terms of that Transport Select Committee. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Any other points anybody wanted to make on that? I don't know whether representatives from the Scarborough Group wanted to make any points.
Thank you, ma'am. We've obviously listened with interest, and we haven't got a lot to add to a very technical debate that's gone on for some time now. I think what we do take away from the discussion is the repeated recognition that there is a dialogue ongoing and may be ongoing for some time about options and about possibilities and about potential schemes. And to us, they are all the ingredients into why the IRP is very clear in its statement. I think it's paragraph 3.49 about safeguarded land and the fact that the safeguarded land provisions are to remain in place. And to us, that's not a statement that's been made lightly. It's been considered in great detail, and it's been considered to allow for the dialogue to continue and for the review to continue for some time. And at the end of that process, we'll all know what those potentials are and what those options are. And until then, we therefore can only see the council's approach being the sensible one, because it's following very clear statements that have been subsequently covered by ministerial questions and no doubt will remain in place in at least the short to medium term. So we read it as a sort of bystander in the dialogue and hear the comments made and can fully understand why the council's stance is as clear and as straightforward as it seems to be.
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, as you're speaking now, I just there is an item on the agenda. I only wanted to cover this very briefly, just to see whether there had been any changes in circumstance in availability and deliverability since it was discussed at the first lot of hearings.
In terms of
of EG 237, yeah.
It is still owned by Scarborough Group. Scarborough Group are still solely focused upon delivering a future employment proposal. They've commenced very early dialogue with the council. We've done that because we've had a long-standing relationship with the City Council over the best part of 10 years now in bringing forward not just all of the Thorpe Park development, but also the Springs Retail Park, being participants in bringing forward residential development and in building the Manson Lane Link Road. So we know how valuable early dialogue is with the City Council, and therefore that process has commenced, not because we're being dismissive of this very important procedure or we're trying to second guess things, but we're getting ready because the demand is very, very strong. I don't know whether you want to cover that now, Ma'am, or come back to it later, but we can give you a very fresh update of what the actual market is saying about the availability of land and the suitability of this site. And if you'd like us to do it now, we'll do it now, or we can come back to it.
I think the issue with discussing matters like that, I think it widens discussion a little bit potentially that others may wish to have been involved in. So my focus was really just on if anything had occurred in the meantime that had negatively affected availability and potential deliverability. That was the focus of my query. I'm sorry I didn't make that plain on the agenda, but I think if we get into discussions about the market, then I think that would open up the discussion. That might potentially be a little bit unfair in terms of other people who might have an interest in that kind of discussion. So I'd just like to focus solely on that availability and deliverability matter, which you've covered for me. Thank you.
Okay, nothing negative at all.
Okay, thank you. And anybody wanted to make any other points in terms of that? No, in that case, then we will move on to exceptional circumstances. I mean, obviously, the council have covered that. That was a specific question. I asked my question 5 following the main modifications consultation, and whether the council's position had changed. Can you just outline your response to that question, Mr. Elliott? Are you happy to deal with that?
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off on that. Nothing that's happened since the hearing sessions has weakened or changed the council's approach to the necessary demonstration of exceptional circumstances as regards the release of EG 237. We are evidence driven in terms of the land supply, and the land supply, when measured against the adopted core strategy targets for employment, form the exceptional circumstances to release EG 237. The IRP, as we've discussed, doesn't change that, and the length of time that the council's assessment, even if the safeguarded land was to be removed after a period of further study for which terms of reference aren't in place, and a outline business case, will be so significant as to place doubt on the delivery of sites within the plan that are safeguarded to meet those targets. So the council's conclusion is that it is appropriate to release land from the Greenbelt as it has been done elsewhere, ma'am, in the site allocations plan, because another 4 sites for employment to meet that overall core strategy target need were released through the non-remitted part of the SAP. So this really is in line with the principle that's already been taken.
Thank you. So just to clarify, your position is, even if the safeguarding directions were lifted within the plan period, which would be up to 2028, then that you consider the exceptional circumstances to justify Greenbelt release would still exist. Is that correct?
Yes,
I just understood.
Yeah, well, there's 2 things. The first is on the evidence that we have in front of us now, which is not giving any indication that those safeguarded directions will be released within the plan period. We believe there are exceptional circumstances for release. If we were to make an assumption, and we don't necessarily believe we have to make an assumption, but if we were to make an assumption and release the site, and all of that safeguarded land was also to be released at some point, and also critically deliverable in its entirety within the plan period, then on those circumstances, we consider that there would be a very minimal exceedance of the adopted core strategy employment land target. And I can let Mr. Bingham talk in detail to you on that if you wish. But that very minimal exceedance would not be unsound at all, and would represent a flexibility and a headroom to an overall core strategy target. But as I say, that there's an awful lot of assumptions to be made before we even get to that stage, ma'am. Okay, thank you. Yeah, Mr. Bingham, I think that would be helpful if you could just expand on that a little bit.
Yes. So if all the land was released and delivered within the plan period, there'd be, based on the existing supply, there'd be a surplus of 5 hectares against the general employment requirements set out in core strategy space policy 9. And then if EG 230 was added to that, there would be a surplus of 26 hectares against that requirement. So that would be about 5%. That would be about 5% above the requirement in terms of the land that would be in the supply. Going back to what Mr. Elliott said, that that relies on all the land being available and deliverable within the plan period.
Okay, thank you. I take it you can still hear me. I just saw that a couple of people's screen froze then, so I just wondered whether it was me. Okay, thank you. In terms of those sites that are affected by safeguarding, are there discussions with the landowners in terms of bringing the sites forward? Has there been any contact? I mean, as Mr. Hall said, that there might be the potential for them to apply for permission anyway, but has there been any discussion with any of the site promoters in terms of these sites that are affected?
I'm not aware of any discussions with the site owners. So some of the sites are large sites which are partially affected by the safeguarding direction. So there have been discussions on the parts of the land that aren't safeguarded, but I'm not aware that those discussions have moved on to development of the safeguarded areas of those sites, and that's just as far as I'm aware today.
Okay, thank you. And Scarborough Group, you've got your hand up.
Yes, sorry, ma'am. You moved off a discussion regarding deliverability within the plan period, I think was the point that Mr. Bingham was making and Mr. Elliott had made previously. And then you moved on to another point. I was just going to tread carefully and not go back to the dialogue we had a short while ago. But if it would help you, we're very happy to give you an update on why we believe it is very deliverable within the plan period, i.e. the Brownmoor allocated site that we're dealing with. But I won't go any further unless you invite me to give you that additional information, because I know you're drawing a line on the constraints of the dialogue. So.
Yeah, I think we did have that discussion at the first set of hearings, and provided nothing has changed that negatively affects that, then I'm content that with that. My query is more really around the safeguarded sites and deliverability and release potentially within the plan period. I mean, just to clarify my concerns about, obviously, where my query is on, obviously that this site would be the permanent release of greenbelt land, and whether that situation on the safeguarded land is likely to change, that has an impact on that. But I mean, obviously, I'm aware of the council's position on that, and I think Mr. Elliott, yes, you wanted to say something.
Sorry, ma'am. Yeah. It wasn't necessarily related to the point that you were just discussing. It was just to remember to feedback to something Mr. Hall had said. Okay,
that's fine. If you wish to do that, that's okay.
Okay, thank you. Yes, just on this section, then, when we're talking about greenbelt and exceptional circumstances, I think we have to remember that we are demonstrating exceptional circumstances through a plan making process here in order to release this particular site as part of this SAP remittal. Mr. Hall's fears that this would be, I think his phrase was, a Pandora's box, which would put at risk speculative development on other greenbelt land, is outside of the remit of this hearing session, because certainly any application that came forward would have to demonstrate very special circumstances through the development management approach.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, Mr. Hall, was that the point you were making about other sites coming forward?
I think so, ma'am. That is something I wish to add a little bit later on, but the point which Mr. Elliott makes, and certainly I recognise that we are talking about the submitted plan, and that is the thing which is before you at the moment, and therefore anything that may come forward outside that submitted plan is possibly not for yourself, but clearly it's not unknown for situations arising whereby matters do come forward which are outside a plan, be it the existing plan or a submitted plan. So thanks for that, Mr. Elliott, but kind of to put a smile on your face, I'm not convinced. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other points anybody wanted to make in terms of either the integrated rail plan and safeguarding directions? Mr. Hall, did you have anything further to say on any of those?
I think not, ma'am. That my position on the integrated rail plan is that there is a great deal unknown, a great deal of matter unknown. I think that the response from the council has been, I'm sure, to the best of their knowledge, but quite frankly, to the best of their knowledge, without, to my understanding, consulting DFT, consulting the safeguarding officer at HS2. They've given a lot of statements which, with great respect, I consider is not factual and rather opinion based, rather than substantiated from the authorities.
Okay, thank you. And just in terms of, you made a point there about the discussions with the safeguarding officer of HS2. Is that a relationship that the council has with HS2? Do you discuss the position as far as HS2 themselves are involved or aware of what's going on? Is that for Miss Lawson to answer?
Yes, I mean, we do have regular discussions with DFT and with HS2, which is why we have a copy of the template letter that went out to all owners and occupiers advising that the safeguarding would remain in place. Both DFT and HS2 have been very clear in confirming that the approach set out in the integrated rail plan is the approach they're taking in terms of the safeguarding remaining in place whilst the Leeds, how to bring HS2 trains from East Midlands to Leeds and Leeds station capacity is undertaken.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hayden, I see your hand is raised.
If I may, ma'am, to the point where we're not based in fact, the officers have not done anything that isn't factually available on a document, and the exec board paper that went in December 4 times asked for clarity on different aspects of the IRP. That is on public record and was taken to exec board in December, and as far as since then we have not had any clarity on any of our questions from the government. So we are regularly asking the government and HS2 and DFT and for clarity and because we need it as much as anybody else does, in fact more so, and we very much want that clarity, but everything that has been presented is based on what we know to be factually true. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hall, any final points you wish to make on the rail plan and safeguarding?
No, ma'am. The only other thing which I would like to raise, whether it's appropriate now or in a short while, is that I have been in communication with the council, and I think you are aware of this because copies were sent to the programming officer of my concerns on exceptional circumstances. I won't go through what I have previously submitted because clearly I do not feel that exceptional circumstances for employment use have been put forward by the council. I do feel, and I have suggested to the council, that there are alternative land uses. Certainly 2 suggestions, but both would require removing the current modification. That I understand that would create issues for the council, but nevertheless, I invite you to consider whether, in fact, this particular site could be used for other uses. And I think I'm thinking particularly in terms of climate change. The council has an emerging core strategy review, and they are saying that they will look for suitable areas for renewable energy generation. Well, my thoughts as I saw this was potentially this is a suitable site that will meet the emerging review by Leeds City Council. I also think that that there should be consideration given to what we as communities put forward, and I speak particularly of National Planning Policy Framework paragraph 156. I know that we have been fully engaged with this, and let me put on record that for a considerable period of time I've engaged with Mr. Elliott and various other officers. I admire them and I greatly respect them, as indeed I do elected members. And thanks to Councillor Helen Hayden, who's here this morning, I've had discussions with her. So thanks to everybody concerned in this process. It will be my defining moment that when we switch off today, that other than the statements of community involvement, you will not have the pleasure of seeing my face again. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Hall, for your contributions throughout the hearings and in writing as well. Mr. Elliott, did you want to respond to the points made, particularly in relation to alternative uses on the site?
Yes, thank you, ma'am. And so Mr. Hall makes reference to two alternative uses in his correspondence. One is a solar farm, and the other is affordable housing. You'll recall at the previous hearing said, oh, sorry, George, you're shaking your head. Not affordable housing.
In the correspondence matter, it was safeguarding. Affordable housing was one of the previous objections for release, but it was safeguarding this site, potentially safeguarding this site, or better still, in my view, to address your emerging cost strategy view, to consider the implications of climate change and whether this should have been considered. Thank you.
Mr. Elliott, then.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification. Sorry about that. Just as a point of fact, though, we did discuss the exceptional circumstances for affordable housing in previous hearings, albeit that this site was subject to that discussion as well. But in terms of a solar farm, just a couple of factual points. A solar farm would still require removal from the green belt, and it would still require exceptional circumstances to be removed from the green belt. But now that the council may be looking at that opportunity through its local plan update 1, which is due to be the Reg 19 consultation is due to happen around the summer. But certainly that is for that plan, and this plan has a specific purpose and a specific remit, and that doesn't extend to sites for climate change.
Okay, thank you. You can remove your hand.
Yeah, ma'am, sorry.
Yes, so you got.
If I may just make one further point, which I meant to do earlier when we were on the topic. I made the point about if a lot of things happen, and all the safeguarded land is returned and available for employment, and Mr. Bingham made the point that there would be a small sort of 5% headroom over the planned target. It was just to make the point that case law does allow for that, and if you were interested, Ms. Walker could set out what that case law is for you.
You mean in terms of an oversupply within an area relating to local plans? I assume that is.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Yes, that's fine. If you wish to refer to that, that's okay. So, Miss Walker, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. As we know, there is no definition of the policy concept of exceptional circumstances, and that is a deliberate policy decision. It demonstrates that there's a plan and judgment to be made in all the circumstances of any particular case. Now, you have heard from the council that there is a deficit in employment land supply, but even if the even if the safeguarding direction was lifted, that would only create a small over provision. And as Mr. Elliott has said, case law is really clear that there's nothing unlawful about that in the terms of releasing Greenbelt. So exceptional circumstances have been found to exist to meet in a case that related to housing needs, but it's the same analogy that even if there is an excess of that need, that still can be found to be lawful to meet in exceptional circumstances, and that's because of the deliberately broad approach that exceptional circumstances requires, which is deliberately not as high a challenge or a bar to meet as very special circumstances in the development management context. So exceptional circumstances can be relied upon together, rationally fitting within the scope of the ones put forward by the council in the context of the planning judgment as decision maker. So there's already precedents set that even if you were really concerned about what might happen with the safeguarding direction soon or in the near future, that very small surplus, there is already case law that sets out that a surplus can still create an exceptional circumstance for the need to change a greenbelt boundary.
Okay, thank you. I think when you produce the note on employment land supply, can you just add the specific case reference?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other points anybody wanted to make in relation to the specific matter that we've been discussing this morning? Yes, the Scarborough Group.
Just very briefly, ma'am. We were only alerted to this suggestion of a solar farm concept in the last few days. We weren't sure how much space you'd allow in today's discussion or how relevant it was for that to be covered in today's discussion. Our only observation is that, as we've confirmed in the areas where we've contributed, that the only changes with regard to the site have been certainly very positive, not negative. And because of the nature of my clients' long-term investment in this area, their only focus is upon delivering at pace significant employment land developments within the area, and they've got no short-term, medium-term, long-term interest in any other concepts of that kind.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I suppose I should make it clear that I accept that Mr. Hall's raised it, but actually because of the narrow scope of this anyway, the discussion about other uses for the site is outside the scope of this at the present time. And as I say, there may be other people that would be interested in commenting on that potentially. So I think Mr. Elliott's been quite clear in his response. I thank you for Mr. Hall for raising it, but I think it's outside the scope, and I don't want to get into discussions on it. Again, that potentially is unfair to people who aren't involved in that. So I will leave that point. I allowed Mr. Hall to raise it, but
that's what we thought, ma'am, but I just didn't want to say nothing and be silent.
Okay. Thank you. If nobody wishes to raise anything, then I just want to make the point that following the hearing, and when I've received the information that I've asked for, hopefully fairly soon, then I'll write to the council following the hearing, just setting out any points that I wish to make. I think it's worth raising at this stage that should I decide that the allocation isn't sound, that there would probably need to be an additional 6 weeks consultation on the main modifications. Again, that's just to put that out there. I will set anything out in my letter, but obviously I need to go away, and I won't give you a finding yet. And in terms of that may have some impact on report deadlines, but again, that is something that I would discuss with the council. Any points anybody wanted to raise in that case? No. Okay.
No, ma'am. Just thank you for your time this morning.
And thank you for yours again, and Mr. Hall. Good luck in the wide world out there. Thank you for your contributions, and to everybody else as well for taking the time and for setting this up at at relatively short notice, but thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Goodbye, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.